give you a sentence or two that your marketing departments would appreciate and approve of, but I would also offer a witty, pithy, or droll metaphor to remember them by. And most of them have approved. I don't think I got to everybody, so we'll see how this goes. But our first sponsor is Center Trade. And we have Renton, welcome here. So Center Trade is the leading provider of flexible digital procurement solutions, including sourcing, contract management, spend analytics, supplier relationship management, and procure-to-pay technology, right?
Sounds good to me.
They've been helping procurement leaders since 2000, and yet Gartner named them a visionary in their latest Magic Quadrant ratings. How about that? So I think of Center Trade as the total S2N solution. And what does that mean? That's right. Soup to nuts. What'd you think I meant? Source to never use? So our next sponsor is also a familiar face around Dallas quite a bit lately. Is HPP, and we have Amanda Pruchowski.
Yay! We're lucky to have it.
And HPP specializes in helping companies of all sizes achieve operational excellence through a number of proven programs developed over the past 20 years that are tactical and practical. I really got that off the website. Tactical and practical, and enable quick wins.
Yes.
Right? Is that right?
Yeah.
So this is going to make Amanda cringe, but I just think of HPP as the hamburger helper of supplier performance. Oh, was that witty?
That was. It was good.
Pithy?
Yeah.
Okay, not too droll. Okay, good. All right, our next sponsor is, I hope I get this right, didn't get to check in with them, but TechVison? TechVison.
Yes.
TechVison. And we have Sanjeev and Manish Sinta. Do we have them here?
They had one of their wives had a baby this morning.
Oh, wow.
So they are not here today. The other has a dog who just went into surgery, but they sent their best.
Oh. So I'll go easy on it.
Yes.
Okay. TechVison offers a suite of tightly integrated offerings which are tailored to each client's requirements and span the services spectrum from application development and maintenance, testing, IT consulting, and staffing for IT infrastructure management through strategic consulting and industry-oriented business processes. A few things set TechVison apart, such as doing fixed price projects with the same team throughout while allowing flexible headcount based on need, and they keep their clients in the know at all times. Just think of TechVison as the anti-black box of tech solutions and workforce providers. Sorry guys, they're not here, but sorry, I really tried to come up with something pithy, but I just couldn't listen anything. Maybe German speakers? Listen, knowledge? Okay, so, and then finally, of course, we have Sarah Scudder of RSN Network. And very simply, RSN is the print e-sourcing tool and network that makes buying print fast, easy, and cheaper than you can do on your own. There are a number of print sourcing options out there, of course, but if you think you can find one that is more complete, convenient, and connected in RSN, well, that's definitely a very tall order.
We have one more. Rapid ratings.
Rapid ratings! I've got rapid ratings here somewhere. What do I missed it. Sorry.
Everett could
Oh, so sorry. Scott and Sheridan. We have Scott.
No, we've ever lost him.
Everett.
So, yes, rapid ratings. Rapid ratings provides the most sophisticated analysis of the financial health of public and private companies in the world, with analytics software that predicts financial outcomes for a company's most important suppliers. Put another way, Rapid ratings helps procurement leaders peer into their supplier's future risk, not just their past. So, I like to think of them as the Moody's of smart supplier risk management.
Very good.
Thanks. Let's go ahead and bring up our panels.
Yeah.
Okay, the way we're going to run this is we're going to start. I'll start at the end with Greg, and we'll let each panelist introduce themselves, and then we'll address the question to them, and then we'll go to the next panelist. And as we go through, sorry, thank you. As we go through, we'll have more opportunities for interaction among the panelists, and also we want some participation with you guys as well. So, Greg, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little about your career.
Hello, you guys, do I need this? Do I need this? Do I need this for that? Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Greg Bass. I'm a director of sourcing with Rent-A-Center. I've spent my entire career in sourcing. I actually have a degree in supply chain management, so I'm living the life that I planned. Love the area. I'm very passionate about saving money, driving value to the bottom line through supplier improvement, project improvement, and negotiations. So thank you all for being here today.
So I shared, or Sarah shared, that I like blues music, and I love blues. One of my favorite artists is a musician named Kev Moe. And Kev Moe has a song called More Than One Way Home. And it's a very apropos thought when you think about procurement careers. And sometimes they go somewhat in a straight line, and oftentimes they don't go in a straight line. And Greg, I thought you might be able to talk to us about just taking advantage of opportunities and how you assess them, and what has that meant to your own career and development.
Sure. So we had a chance to talk a little bit beforehand, and we were talking about how you grow your career really through opportunity, because we don't all, and you're going to hear some really cool examples of folks who didn't go to school for sourcing and procurement, or who didn't set out on a sourcing journey. But I was very fortunate in my career. One of my first jobs was with a company that was in a ton of financial trouble. So everyone's heard of Enron. I was working for Tyco at the time, and a lot of people have forgotten that Tyco was in that same group. Our CEO went to jail. I moved here from North Carolina, and actually my job was eliminated on my drive down. But what I later found out is that the company decided the guy who hired me was way more of an HR liability than I ever could be. And so they let him go, and I took the last spot in. And once I arrived at the role, I just always had the attitude of, what else can I do, right? Because during that time, we had layoffs every 90 days. Our company went from 5,000, our division went from 5,000 to 500. And you learn a lot about yourself and about personal finance and budgeting and savings during times like that. And every time we had a layoff, I went to our director's office and said, hey, the work's not going away. What else can I do? And before I knew it, I was in charge of our most important category. We made power supplies, and our most critical component was passive components, capacitors, resistors. We had tons and tons of part numbers, millions of dollars in spend, and it was our largest category, and I owned that at the age of 24. Well, at the same time, right about the time that happened, our CEO got arrested. The new CEO came in, and it's true, we used to send him letters when he was in prison. That's true. So the new CEO came in, and the challenge Tyco had was they grew by acquisition, but they never harmonized and built synergies out of their sourcing organization. So when the new CEO came in, he said, we're going to stand up a global sourcing organization this month. And whoever has the largest spend of a given category for Tyco globally now owns that category globally. So at 24 years old, I owned a $140 million category, and it just happened because I went and said, what else can I do? How can I help? At that point then, we, that was my first experience running a true 7-step process. That was my first time running a reverse auction. If y'all haven't done those, they're amazing. Every dot is a cost reduction. They're so fun to watch. And we ended up taking about $30 million out of our spend, just like that. And it was through one sourcing event. And after that, I was hooked. I was so energized. I love the opportunity to drive value just through smart sourcing and analysis. But you know, when times are tough, it's easy to sit around and say, you know, we're going under. I don't want to be here. I'm going to lose my job. But the work needs to get done. So if you see an opportunity, don't hesitate. Take it. And you never know what's going to happen.
Great input. Great. Thank you. Naveen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Naveen Rana. I'm a senior global procurement manager at PepsiCo. I've been doing procurement my whole career for the last 11 years. Went to UTE for a long time. I was there for undergrad and grad school, so I was there for about 7 years. Originally from Canada, moved here when I was a kid, so I've been here a long time, know the area really well. The thing I love about procurement is you're always learning, and especially I'm in IT procurement, so that's really a field that I didn't study in school, kind of to your point, Corey, about you don't always find your career path in a straight line. So that's a category I constantly learn from, but the skills you can do in any category.
Let me ask you something about that. So, you know, there's different reasons why people change jobs, right? There are opportunities. There are asking for more opportunity, and that can propel your growth. But then there's sometimes where you go into survival mode, where, you know, things are out of your control, and you can ask for more, but sometimes you just have to take care of yourself. And I know that your career hasn't always taken that straight line, and so maybe you can talk to dealing with resiliency and how to handle it when you're in survival mode.
Sure, and yeah, just like Greg kind of mentioned a few minutes ago, I was in telecom at Ericsson. That was a very good industry to start my career. I was part of a team that didn't exist at first when I started, so there was no IT sourcing team at Ericsson. So over time, I developed a lot of expertise in that category. And at some point, you know, I'd been in the role 9 years or so. I was trying to explore opportunities to move around, and no fault of mine, no fault of the companies, there just weren't opportunities available to advance my career. So at some point, I had to make a deliberate search to say, okay, where can I grow? What can I do differently to add to my experience? So I decided, you know, moving from a regional role to a global role would be a good move. My boss agreed at the time. That was part of my development plan. And that took me on a search both within the company and outside to say, okay, how can I add that experience to my resume? Where can I go do that? So that opened my eyes up to looking outside of telecom, and you know, it was amazing to see how many companies in so many industries have the same sourcing challenges for IT category, for example. So that really opened my eyes to how transferable our skills are. I was a little bit more confident about my experience working at Ericsson, whereas I only knew what I knew before. So that kind of validated that I'm on a good career path, I'm learning good things, I'm doing good work, and that was important to me.
I mean, I have a question, and this is meant to be super interactive, you guys, so feel free to jump in and be lively throughout. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I hear all the time CPOs or heads of procurement need people that know how to source IT. What advice would you give someone who's new to the industry that wants to go into that field or that category but doesn't have any experience? The thing I find hard is getting the experience, right?
Sure. How
do you get your first or second job to learn how to do the IT sourcing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you have to be showing your willingness to learn, and that's hard to do before the interview. So I think a lot of it is starting with informational interviews, kind of getting networked in that industry. Maybe contact someone in LinkedIn or through your network that is doing the type of role you want to be in. Understand from them, how did they get into their role, what did they study, what did they do, and learn from that. And then when you go into the interview, you know, it's okay to be honest that you don't know something. When I was interviewing for my internship, they asked me, because I kept talking about supply chain, because that's what I was studying in school. So they said, well, what do you think of supply chain? I was like, well, I only know what I've read in a book. I didn't really know what sourcing was. And I told them that, but I said I'm willing to learn. And through my internship, I ended up loving the function. And you know, I never studied IT in school. I was a biology major, so there was like very different things that I learned along the way. So IT, because it's changing all the time, I think it's okay to not know it and learn it as you go. So that's how I look at it.
You make a really good point about that, because there's, and if you look much at high performance, high caliber talent, one of the typical things that companies look for is someone who really has what they call catalytic learning. That's taking what you learn in one role and apply it in a different role and be able to move forward like that. And you have that, you demonstrated that, but you also demonstrated figuring out what I don't know, what do I need to know. And rather than wait till you're in the job hunt necessarily, reach out and create a network of people that are doing that to help you gain the knowledge. That's a great insight to have.
Sarah, one thing I might add too, when we were at Ericsson, one of the things Ericsson was really good about was letting us kind of pick projects to go work on. You know, Ollie came and he worked on projects and just said, hey, I know sourcing, I want to learn IT. And a lot of times, certainly in the culture that we came from, if you went to someone, a stakeholder or someone who was technical and said, can you explain this to me? Like, I want to learn this area, I want to grow. How can I help? Right? I mean, a lot of times people are really responsive if you say, you know, explain your role to me or how I can expand in this area. And it was really cool to see Ollie kind of follow that path.
Allie, star.
Yeah.
Love it.
But I mean, I would say too, you know, to that point, he did that as a rotational assignment at Ericsson, you know, kind of a non-linear career. You know, now he's a director of commodities at a major hospital chain in the IT space. So I think that's awesome to see, and he stepped out of his comfort zone.
The theme I'm hearing is just ask.
There's no dumb question. Yeah.
Brianna, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Hi, I'm Brianna Chan, for those of you whom I have not had the pleasure of meeting yet. I have been swimming through the channels, I guess, of procurement since it was called purchasing back in the early 90s. Thank you for saying. And it was actually one of my first jobs out of high school. And so now, yeah, I figured out I dated you, or dated myself here. So I was 18, went to work for a small .com startup. I was employee number 5, and they hired me actually to be the receptionist. And as both Naveen and Greg have both said, you ask. So I said, hey, what else could I do? Because I don't like to sit and wait for the phone to ring. So they taught me purchasing, and they taught me one thing I already knew already was shipping, receiving, and stockroom from prior jobs through the summers. And then I also did HR, and I also did payroll, and I also did accounts payable and receivable. And what else did I do there? I was receptionist. I was not janitor, but I did buy the supplies for the bathrooms, and had to go down to Costco to pick those up. And then I soldered networking boards. So those are all the things I did on any given day. I would do pretty much all those things. But I found that I really loved purchasing. Since I was a kid, I always loved numbers. But I had 2 things that my career aspirations as a child. I wanted to be a mommy, and I wanted to be an OBGYN. In high school, I saw blood, and that eliminated that need to be an OBGYN. But the mommy is still there, and I have 4 kids now. And so I achieved that one. But then purchasing came along. It was really interesting. And then I got thrown into the marketing world. I worked for a small marketing company and learned how exciting and interesting marketing is. So as I went to college at the same time of having children and being married, and not in that order, and anyway, I decided I'm going to get a degree in business administration because I like the numbers and I like the brainiac kind of stuff, but I also want a degree in marketing because I want to play. So I found that in procurement, I was able to do both of those things. So for the last more than 20 years, I have been managing marketing in some aspect within procurement, so I get to still play and intertwine both of those things.
I'd like to ask you something about, the way you sought for opportunities to do, when you're very young in your career. How do you, now that you lead people, how do you develop and foster and encourage those entrepreneurial skills in your team and risk-taking?
Great question. You kind of tied in something else. What are you thinking? So you said entrepreneurial, so I do other things on the side. I don't like to just do one thing, so I actually am an author. I'm working on my second book right now. I also have a few businesses, and I have clients all around the world in those businesses outside of corporate America. To me, that's what keeps my passion and keeps me going, and I do this to give my husband the satisfaction that he always gets to budget off of this paycheck and not have to worry about anything else, no matter what it is. It works. 19 years, we're good. So, what I tell my team though is I say, hey, where do you want to be when you grow up? I don't care how old the person is. What do you want to do? And in every single one-on-one, I like to at least have a quick touch base on a weekly basis with my team and just say, where are we at? Are you good? What do you want to be when you grow up? And because of that, I have a team member who is like, really? Yeah, well, I really don't want to do this. I don't want to be in procurement. Well, what do you want to do? So I'm helping him, supporting him, and encouraging him to actually pursue what his passion is, which is not in the procurement world, and that's perfectly okay. And in the interim, he's a top performer, he does a great job, he knows what he's doing in procurement, but it's not his thing, and that's okay. And when I have the conversations with people in an interview, it's the same thing. It's like, don't tell me today what you want to do today. I want to know what you want to do in 5 years, because I want to help you to get to that point, because you're already where you're at today. So let's see what's going to get you there, and just try to look at that forward vision instead of the past.
That's great. Thank you. Luz.
Yes, thanks for having me. I'm Luz Aragon. I've been in procurement for a lot of years, but I didn't start my career there. I had this degree that I think it was what was before supply chain. It's called production operations management. So I started my career actually as a master scheduler, and then I was doing materials management, and I was working for Federal Mobile at the time, and there was a job, an opening for a supervisor, material supervisor, and a procurement or purchasing supervisor. And so I was going to go down my safe route, right? And I'm going to stick with materials. And my manager and I are having this conversation, and he said, no, I really think you should think about purchasing. I think it's more diverse. I think you're going to enjoy. So anyway, so I started my career there, and had the opportunity to work in many different industries. And in the food industry, actually, for the last maybe 20 years. Yay. So Amanda and I used to work at Conagra together. So I worked at Conagra, Mars, Cargill, the Premium Foods, and now I work for a largest manufacturer of baked goods, Bimbo Bakeries. Actually, in the U.S. is Bimbo Bakeries USA. We're headquartered in Mexico City. We're Grupo Bimbo, and I lead their procurement center of excellence. So I've been with the company a couple of years, 2.5 years. And when the call came in, I've always liked all the other duties as assigned, right? So we're going to reorganize. Count me in. I want to be part of that. Oh, now we're going to do this. Oh, yeah, count me in. So I felt really passionate about a lot of things within procurement, in addition to procurement, but the talent part of it, right? Helping somebody, developing somebody, was really a huge passion of mine. And so when they asked me to participate in this interview process, it was like my dream job. And so it's a great role. We are probably one of the very few functions that functions globally. So we don't get a lot of the support that you typically see in a more structured mature procurement organization or companies. So I play HR manager, I play finance manager, I I played, legal and everything else. And by the way, they gave me CAPEX, global CAPEX as of May of this year. So it's keeping me quite busy.
I want to ask you something about how your career has gone. So you, from college, you
Yes.
wanted to be in supply chain.
Yes.
And so very intentional, had a plan, actually had a plan. And because a lot of people, as a procurement recruiter, find themselves in procurement and not really sure why, didn't plan it, it's how it happens, and it turns out to be a great career. You had a plan, but it's still, that doesn't mean it was always a straight line.
No.
And you've been able to, at certain times in your life, downsize your career.
Yes.
And then, now you're on this huge global stage. If you could talk about how you handled that transition and any advice that you could offer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I tell you, when I left Conagra, I was working with them as a category manager for CAPEX, and I also had strategy. My manager gave me strategy because I said, CAPEX, I outgrew that 4 years ago, I'm not interested. And so he said, we'll make it interesting for you. So Cargill came knocking on my door, and for a big role. And then we reorganized. So this was probably one of those places, you find in your careers where there are some companies where you just grow exponentially, functionally, and I think as a human being. And so we led the reorganization. It was 4 of us, including our CEO, and we reorganized a company the size of Cargill in a period of 9 months. From saying, here's what we need, to here's the org charts, and there's empty boxes, and whoever doesn't change a role needs to apply for one. And so I was one of those 2 people whose job didn't change. We were already had the right model. But when somebody knocks at the door and your very, very high level VP says, have you considered this other role? And you say no, and they say, rethink your answer. And so, so then, long story short, I end up in a massive role, moving to Minneapolis from Omaha. And so, to give you some perspective, we had a target to deliver $500 million in savings in a 5-year period, but these are net of inflation. So cumulative was over $1 billion. And the team, this role they assigned to me to have, had to deliver almost 300 out of those 500 million. So I said, I'm buying a house within 5 miles of work because I'm going to spend a lot of hours there. And so it became very challenging. I mean, I was showing up at work at 6 in the morning because I wanted to have at least an hour before everybody showed up. And then we became really global. And then everybody was showing up at 6. And then the meetings were starting at 6. So then I would start showing up at 5. And then the meetings were starting at 5. And I was showing up at 4. And it's like there aren't enough hours in the day. In the meantime, there's my family on this other side who's saying, okay, so yeah, you show up for dinner, but you're brain dead, right? And so you make I had to make a very difficult decision from a role that I absolutely loved. I was leading the part of the indirect category for North America. And it was about $2.5 billion in spend a year. And we said, that's it. We can't do this anymore, so we gotta figure out, what do we do with this? And so my husband is lucky. He retired many years ago, and I don't know if I'm the retirement fund or what. But one of us has to work. And so we decided I had 2 opportunities, and one of them was with a former manager, that we worked with at Conagra. And so, there was an opportunity to follow him, and there was an opportunity to go somewhere else. And so I went with the known path and moved to Denver, beautiful place, with a very small company compared to Cargill. And that was an adjustment, a huge adjustment. I had to remind myself that I didn't have the volume and the spend and the leverage with my suppliers. Then I also had to realize that this was a smaller company, mostly US, and those are very difficult things to get used to. contract my first week, and he says, you need to negotiate that. And I said, I have to negotiate that? And he says, yes. He says, was somebody else doing it? He was like, I don't know, I guess I'll negotiate it. So, yeah, big adjustment.
So, tell us about the opportunity with Grupo Bimbo, and did you have any self-doubt in going after that, and knowing that you're managing a fraction of what this role is, and what was that like?
Well, I'll start by telling you this. It was a huge risk, I think, following somebody you worked with before, because we got along great. In fact, that was his reference when he was interviewing for that role. And what I realized is that I grew a lot, I changed a lot, and the culture of the company was very different. So our environment, even though we knew each other, was very different. And so, so my advice there is, if you're following a manager, make sure you understand, the culture, because all of us need to adjust to our new environment. And even though we know somebody, we don't know them in this new environment. So I think that we really need to be conscious of that. It was a very different culture, very, very different. And there were so many really good things about it, but I felt like my world was getting very small.
Yeah.
And so when Grupo Bimbo came knocking on my door and they sent me the job description, it was like a dream come true. All the things that I was very passionate about were right there in writing in front of me. And I wanted to go back and work for a global company and have an impact at a much broader level. So it was a difficult decision to leave. It's always difficult when you move your family around, but it was professionally, it's probably one of the best decisions I've made.
We're going to have some time for questions from the audience in just a little bit, but I've got a few toss-ups that I just want to give to the panel, and whoever feels inspired to talk about it, do. Obviously, the elephant in the room, one of the elephants, is that your career is not just up to you. I mean, your career development has a lot to do with your relationship with who? Your boss. So how do you handle, what advice do you have on managing that relationship, managing up, as they say? If it's a great relationship or a good relationship that goes sour, getting it back on track. If you feel like you've been sidelined and you're not getting the kind of assignments that you want or that you previously got, how do you lean back in with your boss and reframe, reboot?
I guess I can start. I would say, yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of it depends on your manager, but I think that, and I think we've heard the examples, right? You've got to show initiative, right? And so at the end of the day, I think each of us we have the responsibility to ourselves to make sure that we manage our careers. And that starts with a conversation, right? And if you have a great manager who supports you, questions to ask, right? And to understand career path. What does that really look like? Because not all moves are vertical, and so I think some of them are going to go like this. So figure out what those look like. Have a plan. Make sure your IDP or your individual development plan is robust enough to set you up for the next level, not just your current one. And then schedule meetings with your manager. Force the discussion to have quarterly reviews. Ask for feedback. Understand what potential derailers you may have. Ask others for feedback. And if you're curious about even other areas, then seek out a coach or a mentor in that space who can help you with that.
So something else to add is I like to manage not just one level, but 2 levels. So I'm going to go there. I like to put on the calendar from day one when I start a new job. I want to know that I have a one-on-one. I want to talk to my manager that first day. And in the case of my latest move to a new company, my manager is located in the same state I am. So it's all over phone and video. So I reached out, I said, I want to make sure we have these one-on-ones. Do you mind if I schedule them? Because it shows 2 things. By me saying, is it okay if I do it, you're gaining their approval and their permission. You're showing initiative, and at the same time, I'm controlling my destiny. The next thing I do is I ask for their feedback on a regular basis. So during our one-on-ones, and like with my own team, I like to meet one-on-one with my management. I like to fill them in on what I'm doing because, especially since we're not in the same state, line of sight, he has no clue what I'm working with unless I tell him what I'm working on. He doesn't know about my wins unless I tell him about my wins. He doesn't know about attaboys from my clients internally or my suppliers unless I tell them. If I get an email, I'm the first one to forward that to my manager, usually kind of as a, ha ha ha, look what I got today. I try to make it lighthearted, so it's not just me bragging, but the manager is aware. Most companies I've worked at least the larger ones, they have performance review systems that you're actually able to request feedback from different people. I send that to my business unit clients, and I make sure my manager gets a copy of it, not just the feedback coming to me. I want them to see that. I volunteer to work on other projects outside of my job, outside of my role, outside even of the department. And then when I'm meeting at that skip level management, I'm letting him know everything I'm working on because I want to make sure there's no break in that chain. So if the relationship goes sour with my direct manager, their management knows what I've been working on. Their management knows, and I'm going to hit on something that's very popular these days and talked about a lot, and that's your brand. You need to make sure you're controlling your brand. If you're controlling your brand, your relationship with your manager is this much of your success. The rest of it is up to you. So those are just some of the techniques that I use because I want to make sure that I'm able to actually control my career and not have somebody dictate it to me.
Yeah, I think you guys touched on some good points, and I think there's two things that always stick out to me. One is communication, which I think is a lot of what Brianna was just talking about. Don't assume your manager knows what you want and that you're just going to get it by doing a good job. You have to communicate what you expect for your next role or your 5-year plan, and intentionally talk about, what things should I be working on to get there. The other thing that I think Lou's touched on, I've heard a lot of leaders talk about having mentors and like a personal board of directors. So these are people you trust, they have good experience, and you can talk to them about your career objectively as like an external point of reference. So like for me, Greg was my mentor when I started off many years ago. My parents, my dad's in sales, so I get to bounce ideas off of him all the time. Being a procurement guy, it's kind of fun to have that back and forth with him. I've had some former bosses play that role for me. There's leaders in other functions I've talked to at the companies I've worked at. So it's good to just have those different perspectives and just try to glean from the best of that feedback you're getting, what resonates with what I want to do, and that'll help you.
Yeah, so I'm probably going to give it a little bit different answer because I think a lot of great things have already been said. But the one I really want to hit on is your personal brand, right? I mean, we need to be very cognizant about what we put on LinkedIn, what we put on, social media. Sarah and Amanda do an amazing job of managing their LinkedIn and putting out content that's good and valuable and doesn't immediately give them a return. But if you want to know where a sourcing conference is anywhere in the world, they're there, right? They've built such a great network, but they've also cultivated this. If you need someone a sourcing coach, a supplier development partner, just by seeing that so frequently, so often, so consistently, right? I try and do the same for myself. I'm not nearly as good about that, right? But it's about being mindful of what you present and the fact that everyone sees it, right? So your career and your success, it is about what you put into it, what you want to get out of it, and how you manage and how you choose to shape it. More so than ever, opportunities are limitless.
And to your point, actually.
Sorry, I have a question.
Okay. To your point with the social media, I've had people on my team fired, not myself initiating it, because the risk and security departments for the companies I worked for regularly survey not only the employees, but the employees' friends' social media profiles. So they have been fired because the thought is, if you're willing, if your network, right, the people you're hanging out with are always partying and they're half naked all the time, or all that they're talking about is being drunk, and that's what's on the videos that you see of them, they figure you're the same way. So, especially to the younger generation, watch it. You know, I've unfriended people in my personal Facebook and other areas. LinkedIn, it's a totally different place, because people don't typically post that kind of stuff. But any of the other real social, personal side, I will unfriend people. And I don't friend people that I work with until after I no longer work with them. They don't need to know about your personal life, but you have to have that vision.
Yeah, I'll say, I'm sorry, Rick, like, for that reason, I have 2 Twitter accounts, right? I mean, if y'all want to find me and talk about sourcing professional content, I'm there as my name for a very specific reason, and that's the content I like and share and monitor for my personal brand. You know, for the sports stuff, you know, or memes or stuff like that. Like, I'm not telling any of y'all what that is. That is for me. So, I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
So Greg, I have a question for you. When we were building out this panel, I talked to several people that have worked for you or with you, and you've got some incredible feedback of being known as just an amazing leader and boss. And I would like you to share with the room, what are 3 things that you look for in a leader in procurement today? Not 5 years ago or 10 years ago, today.
Wow.
Not experience, but things about someone that when you're hiring or that you want as a boss, what are the 3 most important things?
So first, thanks for the kind words. I guess all the checks have cleared. You know, if I'm looking for someone that, you know, could grow into that leadership track, or I'd trust with a high profile category, I want someone who's hungry. Like, actually, my boss and I were talking about this today. I want someone to come in and say, I want your job, right? I want them to take my job. I want them to say, I can do it better, I can do it more innovative, like, awesome. Because I want my boss's job, right? I want them to have that hunger and that desire and that drive. So, you know, I would say, so determination, I would say is a big one. I would take attitude over aptitude any day of the week. Probably the highest performing team I've ever been a part of. Naveen and I sat right next to each other. We had 3-4 other people that, I mean, we all just clicked very well. We kind of shared work. You know, if people were overwhelmed, we just kind of jump in. So, good attitude, determination, critical thinking. Critical thinking to me is almost I don't necessarily look for sourcing people, right? I want to know, walk me through a decision process. Sometimes in interviews, I'll even ask somebody a very, very random question just to see how they get to the answer. Like, I don't care what the answer is, there's no wrong answer. But, you know, if you kind of step back and say, oh, well, why would you ask me that question? I'm never going to need to know that. Well, you're right, but a stakeholder is going to ask you a question that you're not prepared for. And if you kind of like furrow your brow, you just failed. So.
You know, I think to expand a little bit on that, you know, I told you I'm HR procurement. You know, our talent mapping sessions are very interesting, right? Because we're no longer looking at how good, you know, our team members are in procurement. Functional knowledge and skill has taken, you know, a second step. What we're really looking and measuring is a lot of the things that you're talking about, right? Is mental agility, and it's not really how smart you are, but rather how curious you are, right? Because curiosity is going to bring innovation and value in a completely different way. We're looking at results agility. You know, how persistent are you? How are you leading through results through others? We're looking at people agility. So people is not how nice you are. It's really about, you know, your desire to help others succeed, building high-performing teams. We're looking at just self-awareness. How well do you know yourself, and how open are you really to feedback and to drive, you know, and to continue to drive. So there's nothing that talks about functional knowledge or even performance. I mean, performance is only a predictor of performance, is not a predictor of potential.
The studies show EQ accounts for 60% of performance.
Yeah. So very, very different really looking for when we're looking at the future leaders of procurement. It's no longer just how good you are at negotiating.
So let's have, we've got 10 minutes. So what you've all just been talking about is really self-management, because no matter what your job is, there are things about it that you're going to love. That's why you want to get into that job. You love negotiating, right? You don't love Excel necessarily. You know? But it's you know it's that ability, the aspects of your job that you don't like, that you reframe in your mind and you get it done, right? Let's open it up to some questions from the audience.
I have one for Naveen. Do you consider ITIL critical to start up? So if you don't have a whole lot of experience in hardware, software, SaaS negotiations, to gain some knowledge through that certification. It was recommended to me before, but I wasn't sure, and I do have some experience.
Yeah.
But now I'm in the telco side, so.
I always tell people, I get this question a lot from students as well. It's never going to hurt you to get the certification. I don't think it's usually a requirement for a lot of jobs, but you know, I'm never going to tell someone to not learn something. I think that's a good thing to do for yourself. If you have the time and you want to do that, there shouldn't be a reason not to.
I have a question for Lou and Joanna. So Amanda and I are really involved in an initiative around women in procurement and how can women progress their careers and be at that executive level. What pieces of advice would you have for women trying to advance their career in a men's world, in a men's profession, in a men's industry? So we host a lot of events, and a challenge that I have is we'll do events in some cities and we can't find women CPOs because there are none in that city, and that's a problem to me.
It is definitely still a culture, I think, in a lot of businesses and companies. There is a misconception that women can't do the job. When I was younger, I heard often that, oh, well, you have children, so we're gonna give that to this guy over here. I'm like, yeah, he has kids too, what's the difference? Like, it's not like I'm actively nursing my child, right? I'm in the office just like he is. So what's the difference? And they never could provide me with an answer, but that's the old school, you know, good old boy kind of mentality. And unfortunately, that is still the case. There are very few CPOs that are women. And I would love to see that change. I think as far as growing your career in a man's world, because it still is, right? That is progressing and it's changing. Right now, statistically in the United States, women are the breadwinners of 70% of the households. So that has shifted. So men are beginning to stay home and take care of the family, take care of the home. Women are now the ones that are going to college, they're getting their careers, and they're the ones who are becoming the breadwinners. Now what's interesting is for the next generation, like my daughter, she's in college. Sadly, 7% of the entire population at the college are males. You want to go meet your future spouse in college? Good luck. You're probably not going to meet them there. So as this shifts, and I think we're going to start to see more and more female executives. I know the last company I was at in the procurement organization, there was one woman. She moved on. They filled it with another woman because they were trying to keep women in. They didn't have women that they felt were qualified to then fill the role, so they filled it with a man. It's tough. It's really tough, but I think as we continue to see that shift of just the household as a whole, we're going to see more and more of the women climbing the ladder in all aspects of corporate America.
I would add to that just anecdotally as a recruiter, I'm seeing a lot of equity in compensation, and the ISM salary survey supports that as well. So I'm certainly seeing that change.
And I'm struggling to answer that question because I was fortunate enough to have been raised by a very strong woman who never maybe even think about that I was different than a man in terms of what I own and what I'm entitled to. And so it's never really played a role in my career. I don't think anybody, and I have been, there were times, probably 2 or 3 times in my career when I actually sat in a conference room and I looked around and it was only men and me. And I was telling them what to do, whether they liked to hear it or not. And so, when I look at my leadership team today, it's only men. But I've never felt that being a woman has given me a disadvantage. And I guess I can thank my mother for that. I negotiated my compensation very well. In fact, probably even better than some of my peers who are at a higher level. And so I think somebody asked me one time, it was one of our VPs of HR at one of the companies I worked for. He made a comment, he asked me a question about how I was being treated being one of the very few females in the leadership team. And so, are we making you feel comfortable, he asked me. And so I looked at him and I said, well, nobody had ever made me feel different until now.